The first thing I knew was pain. A thick, stupid pulse behind my eyes, each beat a hammer blow against the inside of my skull. A low hum vibrated through the floor, through the cheap mattress, and up into my bones. The air smelled of stale cigarette smoke and something sour, maybe old beer. I opened my eyes. A water stain, shaped like a fat dead bird, spread across the ceiling. Peeling paint. A single bare bulb hung from a frayed cord. I sat up. The room spun for a second, then settled. I was in a motel room, a shitty one. My clothes felt stiff, slept in, blue jeans, a gray t-shirt, a heavy denim jacket bunched up on the floor. My mouth was dry, tasted like ash. I swung my legs over the side of the bed. The linoleum was cold against my bare feet. Who was I? The question landed in my head with a dull thud, and found nothing to attach to. No name, no face but the bleary one I couldn't see yet. No yesterday. A surge of something, not quite panic, more like a deep, chemical wrongness, tightened my chest. I stood up, leaning a hand against the wall to steady myself. A small table, a chair, a Bible with a cracked spine, and a black rotary phone. On the other side of the room, a Gideon's Bible lay on a small table. A dresser with one drawer hanging open. A small, grime-streaked bathroom. That was it. That was the whole world. I needed clues. I needed a name. I picked up the denim jacket from the floor. It was heavy. I shoved my hands into the pockets. The left one was empty. The right one held a small, hard rectangle. A pack of cigarettes, almost full. And something else. A folded piece of paper. It felt coarse, worn soft at the creases. I unfolded it. It was a map, sketched by hand in what looked like black marker. The lines were clumsy, the lettering blocky. It showed a few crisscrossing roads, a river, a cluster of buildings marked town. Several spots were marked with an X. One of the X's, far off to the west of the town, was circled in the same black ink. Beside it the words, abandoned gas station, 9 p.m. I stared at it. A drunk's treasure map. A joke. My headache flared, a spike of white-hot agony driving through my right temple. I grunted, squeezing my eyes shut. I crumpled the paper in my fist, ready to toss it into the overflowing wastebasket. It was meaningless. Just some stupid thing I must have drawn myself in a blackout. Some game. I started to unclench my fist, to let it drop. But I didn't. Some little wire, buried deep underneath the pain and confusion, pulled taut. I smoothed the map out again on the dusty surface of the dresser. I looked at the crude drawing, the stark black circle, and then I turned it over. On the back there was just one word. It wasn't written in the clumsy block letters of the front. This was different. It was written in a single, clean, deliberate stroke, a deep, wet red. Go. As my eyes fixed on the word, the pain in my head exploded. It wasn't just a pulse anymore. It was a shatter. For a half second, an image flashed behind my eyes. A white light, so bright it hurt. The back of a hand. My hand? I couldn't tell. It was holding a red pen, the tip pressed to paper, drawing a very specific downward stroke. The flash was gone as quickly as it came, leaving only the throbbing ache and a fresh gloss of sweat on my forehead. Okay. Not just a drunken scrawl. Something else was going on. My breath started to come in short, shallow bursts. The irritation I'd felt was gone, replaced by a cold, crawling thing in my gut. I needed air. I walked to the window, the one beside the buzzing neon motel sign just outside. I pulled the grimy curtain aside a few inches and peered out. The motel was a single-story, L-shaped building fronting a two-lane asphalt road. Across the street, a brick wall was covered in faded graffiti. A street lamp cast a sickly yellow cone of light onto the wet pavement. And standing just at the edge of that light, half in shadow, was a man. He was wearing a dark coat, the collar turned up. I couldn't see his face clearly from this distance, just the pale shape of it under the brim of a hat. He wasn't doing anything. Not smoking, not waiting for a ride. Just standing there, leaning against the wall. And he was looking right at my window. It wasn't a casual glance, it was a stare, fixed, unblinking. The kind of look a man gives a target. The hair on my arms stood up. I let the curtain fall, my hands suddenly numb. I stepped back, out of the small patch of light filtering into the room. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. Shit! Who the hell is that? My mind raced, but there were no answers. Just a blank wall. He was looking at me. Or at least, at my room. I felt watched, pinned. I looked at the rotary phone on the table. A lifeline. I lunged for it, snatched the heavy receiver off the hook. I pressed it to my ear. Nothing. Not even a dial tone. Just dead, hollow plastic. I clicked the cradle up and down. Click, click, click. Nothing. The wire from the wall had been pulled from the socket. No, not pulled. It looked like it had been cleanly cut. Now the cold thing in my gut turned to ice. I was cut off. Trapped in this shitty little room with a pounding headache, no memory, and a man across the street staring at my door like he was waiting for something to ripen. Panic began to bubble in my throat, hot and metallic. I was being hunted. The thought was immediate, instinctual. It didn't come from a memory. It came from the man's posture, from the dead phone line, from the stark red word on the back of the map. Go. Suddenly, the map wasn't a choice anymore. It was an instruction. It was the only goddamn thing in this room that wasn't a wall. A sound from outside. A car horn. Distant. Then, another sound. Closer. The scrape of a leather sole on pavement. I crept back to the window, my breath held tight in my chest. I risked a look through the crack in the curtains. The man was gone from the wall. My eyes scanned the street. Empty. The cone of yellow light was just a cone of yellow light. Then I saw him. He was halfway across the road, walking directly toward the motel. Directly toward my section of the building. He wasn't hurrying. His pace was deliberate, measured. Each step was a death sentence being delivered. Fuck. Oh, fuck. My brain kicked into a different gear. All the questions. Who I was, what I did, vanished. They were a luxury. All that was left was the animal instinct. Flee, hide, fight. I wasn't a fighter. I could feel it in the weakness of my limbs, the frantic flutter in my chest. Hiding felt like a delay, not a solution. He knew what room I was in. That left fleeing. I grabbed the denim jacket, shoving my arms into it. The map was still clutched in my hand. I jammed it into a pocket. What else? Wallet? Keys? I patted my jeans. Nothing. I looked around the room. Nothing in here was mine. It was a cage, not a home. The only things that belonged to me were the clothes on my back, a pack of cigarettes, and this terrifying map. I had to get out. Not through the window. It faced the front. The door. It was my only chance. But he was coming. I could hear it now. The soft thud of footsteps on the concrete walkway outside. Closer. I backed away from the door, pressing myself against the far wall, next to the bathroom. My eyes were locked on the thin strip of light under the door. The footsteps got louder, deliberate, confident. They stopped. Right outside my door. The world stopped with them. The hum of the neon sign seemed to deafen me. I could hear the blood pounding in my ears, a frantic, wet rhythm. I held my breath, waiting for the handle to turn, waiting for the wood to splinter, waiting for the end of a silence that was louder than any scream. Seconds stretched into lifetimes. My lungs burned. Just as I thought I would pass out, the silence was broken. A single, soft scrape, like the toe of a boot being dragged. Then, footsteps. Moving again. But they weren't coming in. They were moving away, fading down the walkway. I stood frozen, listening until the sound was completely gone, swallowed by the low drone of the highway. He was gone. I didn't believe it. I waited another full minute, my body coiled tight as a spring. Nothing, just the hum. Just my own ragged breathing returning. Slowly, cautiously, I crept toward the door. I put my ear against the cool, painted wood. Silence. I reached for the knob, my hand shaking so badly it took 2 tries to get a grip. I turned it. The latch clicked with obscene loudness. I pulled the door inward, just a crack. The walkway was empty. To the left, the asphalt of the parking lot glistened under the lights. To the right, the walkway continued around the corner. No one. A wave of lightheadedness washed over me. I'd survived. For now. I had to go. Now. Before he changed his mind and came back. I slipped through the door, pulling it shut behind me. The click of the lock settling into place was reassuring. I turned to run, and I froze. There, on the worn, faded carpet just inside the threshold of my room, was a footprint. It was perfectly outlined, the ridged pattern of a work boot's sole, filled in with dark, wet mud. It pointed in. I hadn't seen it when I was inside. It wasn't there before I heard the footsteps. He hadn't tried to break the door down. He hadn't needed to. While I was cowering against the far wall, listening to him stop outside, he had already been in my room. He had been standing right there, just inside the door in the dark, listening to me not breathe. The footprint was a brand, a statement. It burned itself onto the inside of my eyelids. He had been in the room, not trying to get in, but already inside, listening to the frantic beat of my heart against my ribs. A predator listening to its prey. The wave of nausea passed, replaced by something cold and hard. Adrenaline. I didn't bolt. I backed away from my own door, moving silently, my bare feet making no sound on the damp walkway. I glanced left and right. The parking lot was empty. The road was empty, but he was out there. He hadn't gone far. This wasn't over. This was a game. My hand dove into the jacket pocket and closed around the crumpled map. My only compass in this new, terrifying world. Abandoned gas station. 9 p.m. I had no watch, no way of knowing the time, but the darkness felt deep and settled. It had to be close to 9. The map wasn't an invitation, it was a summons. And the man with the muddy boots was the enforcer. I didn't run towards the road. I ran the other way, around the corner of the L-shaped building, keeping close to the wall. The back of the motel was a field of overgrown weeds and discarded junk. A busted television, a tire, a rusted-out water heater. I stumbled through the wet grass, my feet sinking into the soft mud, and hit the tree line at the edge of the property. I didn't look back. Looking back was a death sentence. The woods were a wall of black. I plunged in, branches whipping at my face, thorns tearing at my jacket. I moved on pure instinct, pushing forward, away from the motel lights. After what felt like an eternity, I broke through the trees and found myself on a gravel shoulder beside a 2-lane asphalt road. The same road the motel was on, just further down. I started walking. My breath came in ragged clouds in the cold air. Every passing set of headlights made me flinch, ready to dive into the ditch. My heart hammered with each car that sped by, a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Who the fuck was I? What had I done to have someone hunt me like this? The questions were useless. They were noise. The only thing that mattered was the next step, and the one after that. The only goal was the gas station. Maybe there were answers there. Or maybe just a different kind of trap. It took me a long time. The walk was cold and exposed. Finally, I saw it. A dark shape against the paler darkness of the sky. A silhouette of rusted pumps and a collapsing roof. The abandoned gas station. The asphalt of its lot was cracked, weeds growing up through the fissures like green veins. A single pole with a shattered lamp cast no light. The place smelled of decay, of spilled oil and wet rot. I moved off the road, my feet crunching on the broken asphalt. The main building was a single-story block with boarded-up windows and a door hanging open on one hinge. Beside it, a 2-bay garage stood like a hollowed-out skull, its large doors long gone, revealing a cavern of blackness within. I circled the main building, my senses on a high wire. The air was still. The only sound was my own breathing. I felt stupid. I felt like a rat being led through a maze. What was I even looking for? Listen. I pushed the sagging door open further. The screech of the hinge was impossibly loud in the quiet. Inside, the darkness was complete. I fumbled in my jacket, my fingers finding the pack of cigarettes. And a book of matches. I pulled one out, struck it against the strip. The small flame burst to life, a tiny, defiant sun. The light flickered over a scene of total dereliction. An overturned counter. Broken glass crunching under my feet. Shelves torn from the walls. Debris everywhere. My headache pulsed in time with the flickering match. I was about to let it burn my fingers when the flame caught something in the back corner. A dull, metallic gray. A squat, old locker, the kind a mechanic would use. It was dented and covered in rust, but it was intact. And as the match died, I heard it. A faint clack. Like a bit of metal settling inside another bit of metal. It probably came from the building cooling. Or a rat. Just rats. I stood in the dark, telling myself it was nothing. I felt ridiculous. Chasing a hand-drawn map to an old gas station in the middle of the night. But the footprint. The man in the coat. The cut phone line. I wasn't just being foolish. I was being herded. I lit another match and walked towards the locker. The door wasn't locked, just rusted shut. I got my fingers under the edge and pulled. It resisted, groaning, then gave way with a screech that set my teeth on edge. The match went out. I stood in a new, more profound darkness, the metallic smell of rust in my nose. Lighting my third match, I peered inside. The locker was empty, except for one thing on the bottom shelf. It was a small, wooden box, covered in a thick layer of dust and cobwebs. A child's music box. The paint was peeling, but I could make out faded roses and ribbons. A small, tarnished crank stuck out of the side. Why? What the hell was this? My hand moved on its own. I picked it up. It felt light, cheap. Dust came off on my fingers. Curiosity, stupid and dangerous, got the better of me. I turned the crank. It was stiff, grinding with resistance. Then it caught. A melody began to play. A simple, looping tune. Tinny, and slightly out of key. Cheerful. The kind of melody that should have been innocent. But it wasn't. It sent a splinter of ice straight down my spine. I knew this song. I didn't know my own name, but I knew this fucking song. The cheerful notes echoed in the dead space, a grotesque counterpoint to the rot and decay. I dropped the box. It hit the concrete floor with a hollow thud, and the music stopped abruptly. The silence that rushed in was heavier than before. Where do I know that from? The question hammered at the wall of my amnesia, but nothing gave way. I just knew. The feeling of being watched came back with a vengeance. I backed out of the small building, my eyes scanning the darkness around the station. The empty road. The black trees. Nothing. Then I heard it. A sound that didn't belong. The crunch of gravel. Not under my feet. Out on the road. I dropped low, behind one of the rusted gas pumps. My heart seized. A car. It was turning off the road, into the station's lot. It moved slowly, without its headlights on. A dark sedan, a ghost, gliding over the broken asphalt. It rolled to a stop 50 feet from me, its engine cutting out with a final, soft cough. The driver's side door opened. A figure emerged. Tall, wearing a dark coat. I could see the glint of something long and metallic in his hand. He shut the car door, not with a slam, but with a soft, controlled click. It's him. He's here. Panic flared, hot and acidic in my throat. I scrambled backward on my hands and knees, crab walking toward the only cover available, the open maw of the garage. The concrete floor was slick with something I didn't want to identify. I pressed myself into the deepest shadows, behind the hulking, skeletal remains of a pickup truck. It was missing its wheels and most of its engine, a carcass of steel. All I could do was make myself small, erase myself. I heard his footsteps. Slow, deliberate, the crunch, crunch, crunch on the broken lot. He wasn't searching, he was strolling, like he owned the place, like he knew exactly where I was. Then a new sound started. A low, rhythmic scraping. Scrape, drag, scrape, drag. He was in the garage. The sound was closer now, echoing off the concrete walls. The sound of metal on concrete. He was dragging the iron bar he carried, marking his territory. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead, my neck, my back. I pressed my face against the cold, rusted metal of the truck's chassis, trying to control my breathing, trying to make it stop. And then he started to whistle, a tinny, cheerful, out-of-key melody, the song from the music box. My blood turned to ice water. This was a performance, a show put on just for me. He knew I was here. He knew I'd found the box. The whole thing was a setup. I wasn't finding clues to my past. I was walking a path he had laid for me. He walked past my hiding spot. I could see his silhouette against the slightly less black opening of the garage. The coat. The glint of the iron bar. He was so close I could smell the damp earth on his clothes, the faint scent of rain. I held my breath until my lungs burned. My body was one giant screaming nerve. Don't move. Don't breathe. Don't exist. He stopped, maybe 10 feet past me. The whistling stopped. The scraping stopped. Silence. I could hear the blood roaring in my ears. I squeezed my eyes shut. This is it, he heard me. A single drop of sweat detached from my forehead. It felt like it was falling in slow motion. It hit the concrete floor just beside my head. Tick. The sound was a gunshot in the silent garage. I froze. Every muscle in my body locked. He turned his head slowly, his silhouette shifting. He was looking directly into the darkness where I was hidden. He couldn't see me. He couldn't. But he was looking right at me. The silence stretched, pulled tight like a wire around my throat. My heart had stopped. I was sure it had just stopped beating. Come on. Move. Do something. Or just get it over with. He stood there for a full 10 seconds. An eternity of absolute soul-crushing terror. Then he shrugged. A casual, dismissive gesture. He turned and walked out of the garage. The iron bar held loosely at his side now, not dragging. He got into his car. The door clicked shut. The engine turned over. The headlights flashed on for just a second, sweeping across the garage and illuminating the rusted truck I was hiding behind in a brilliant, terrifying flash. Then they were off again. The car reversed, turned, and drove away, its red taillights disappearing down the dark road. He was gone. I didn't move for a long time. I just knelt there, pressed against the dead truck, shaking. The shaking started in my hands and spread through my whole body until my teeth were chattering. It wasn't from the cold. It was a deep, violent tremor from the very center of my being. He had been right there. He had played with me. And he had let me go. For now. When I could finally move, my limbs felt like lead. I staggered out of the garage, back into the open air. The moon had risen, a pale sliver that did little to fight the darkness. I needed to see the map. I needed to know what fresh hell was next. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely hold the paper still. I fumbled for the matchbook. One match left. I struck it. The flame flared. I held it close to the map, my eyes searching the crude drawing. There was the X for the gas station, circled in black. But underneath it, something was new. Something that hadn't been there before. Written in the same wet, deep red as the GO on the back, was a new line of text. The handwriting was a clean, deliberate stroke. Back quote. You always loved that tune. Back quote. The match burned my fingers. I dropped it with a curse. I stood in the dark, staring at the invisible map in my hands. The letters burned behind my eyes. It was my handwriting. I didn't know how I knew, I just did. Like the melody, I knew the shape of those letters. They were mine. The paper in my hands was a dead weight. The letters, my letters, were a brand on my mind, sharper than any footprint. Back quote. You always loved that tune. Back quote. It was a statement of fact from a past I couldn't access, written in a hand I couldn't deny. The cold night air felt too thin to breathe. I was no longer being hunted. I was being guided by my own ghost. The map had another location, a small X over what looked like a residential street. There was no time marked next to it. The time was now. The game didn't stop because I was scared. It only stopped when he, or I, decided it did. I walked back to the main road. The sedan was gone. The world was just me, the cracked asphalt, and the pale sliver of moon. I started walking in the direction the man had driven. Each step was a force of will. My body wanted to curl into a ball in the ditch and wait for the sun. But the map, my own damning creation, pulled me forward. It was a long walk. The road was straight and dark, flanked by dark fields. I kept my head down, listening for the sound of an engine. Nothing came. After what felt like miles, the landscape began to change. A streetlight appeared. Then, another. The smell of wet earth was replaced by the smell of cut grass. I was entering a town, or the edge of one. The houses started to appear. Small, neat rectangles with dark windows and sleeping cars in their driveways. A world of quiet normalcy that felt alien. The name on the map was Oakwood Drive. I found it. A street sign gleaming under a lone lamp. The houses here were bigger, set back from the road on perfect squares of lawn. Two-story homes with shutters and mailboxes shaped like little barns. It was the kind of street where nothing bad was supposed to happen. Number 42. I saw it from a block away. It was the only house on the street with no lights on. Not a porch light. Not a dim glow from a television. Just a dark shape against the night sky, a hole in the fabric of the neighborhood. The lawn was perfect. The hedges were trimmed. A concrete path led from the sidewalk to the front door. A small, white picket gate stood half open at the head of the path. I stopped across the street, my feet cemented to the pavement. I was supposed to go in there. Break into a stranger's house in the dead of night. Why? What was waiting for me? I looked up and down the street. Nothing moved. No cars. No people walking their dogs. The silence was a blanket. My heart thumped a heavy, slow rhythm against my ribs. Turn around. Walk away. Find a bus station and get out of this state. The thought was sane. It was rational. But my feet moved. I crossed the street, drawn by an invisible thread. My hand reached out for the picket gate. It felt cool and smooth under my fingers. It swung open without a sound. They just forgot to latch it. The excuse formed itself in my head, thin and useless. I walked up the concrete path. Each step felt loud on the hard surface. I stood on the welcome mat before the front door. It was a heavy wooden door, painted a dark green, with a polished brass handle. This was insane. I was about to be shot for trespassing. I raised a hand to knock, then stopped. My instructions were never to knock. My instructions were to go. I put my hand on the brass knob. I expected it to be locked and solid. I would try it, find it locked, and then I could leave. I could say I tried. I turned the knob. It gave way. A faint click echoed from the internal mechanism. The door was unlocked. A cold wave washed over me. This wasn't an accident. This was an invitation. The door swung inward on silent hinges, opening into a pit of blackness. The air that flowed out was cool and smelled of dust and something else. Something like old perfume. I stepped over the threshold. The door clicked shut behind me. I didn't touch it. Maybe it was the draft. I stood in the entryway, my eyes struggling to adjust. Faint light from the street lamp outside filtered through a large window next to the door, casting long, distorted shadows. I could make out shapes. A staircase rising into the darkness to my right. An archway leading into a living room on my left. Everything was covered in white sheets. The furniture, the tables, whatever was on the walls. All of it draped in white cloth, like a morgue for a house. The shapes under the sheets were lumpy and anonymous, ghosts of furniture. I moved into the living room, my feet silent on a thick carpet. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light. I reached out and my fingers brushed against one of the sheets. The fabric was soft, the dust thick and fine. My eyes were drawn to the far wall. A fireplace. A dark brick rectangle. The sheet, covering the mantelpiece, was arranged differently, bunched up in the middle. I walked towards it. The floorboards didn't make a sound. I reached the fireplace and pulled the sheet away. It came off with a soft whoosh, releasing a cloud of dust that made me cough, a harsh, dry sound in the quiet room. On the mantelpiece, among some unlit candles and brass knickknacks, was a single, silver-framed photograph. A family photo. A man, a woman, and a small girl of about 6 or 7, all smiling. They were standing in a sunny backyard. The woman was blonde, her smile wide. The little girl had pigtails and was missing a front tooth. The man had his arm around the woman. He was wearing a plain blue shirt. His face was gone. It hadn't faded. It had been destroyed. Someone had taken something sharp and scratched it out. Not just crossed it out, but clawed at it, tearing the paper, gouging deep, violent lines back and forth until all that was left of the man's features was a shredded, gray pulp of paper and fiber. The violence of it was immediate. It was personal. The headache came back, a hot nail driven into the base of my skull. A wave of sickness rolled up from my stomach. The room seemed to tilt. I leaned a hand against the cold brick of the fireplace to steady myself. What happened here? The question didn't matter. What mattered was that I was here. In this violated space. This wasn't about my past anymore. This was a crime scene. And I was walking right through the middle of it. Creak. The sound came from above. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. It was the sound of a single footstep on an old floorboard. Weight settling where it shouldn't be. My blood went cold. I wasn't alone. Then, a louder sound. Slam. A door, somewhere on the second floor, was slammed shut. The sound was a gunshot in the still house. It echoed through the downstairs. A definitive, angry punctuation mark. My first thought was him. The man in the coat. He'd followed me. He was here. He was upstairs. My second thought was even worse. It wasn't him. It was someone else. My eyes darted to the front window. I crept towards it, staying low, and peered through the space between the draped sheet and the window frame. The street was still empty. Quiet. Except for one thing. At the far end of the block, parked under the fuzzy glow of the next streetlight, was a car. A dark sedan. The shape was unmistakable. I could just make out a figure in the driver's seat. A silhouette, perfectly still. Watching the house. Blocking my only way out. He wasn't in the house with me. He was outside, waiting. A knot of ice formed in my gut. If he was out there, who was upstairs? My panic had a new, sharp edge. I was trapped, pinned between a known enemy outside and an unknown presence inside. My gaze swept the room, looking for a weapon, for anything. My eyes landed on the fireplace. A set of iron tools leaned against the brick. A brush, a shovel, and a fire poker. I grabbed the poker. It was heavy, solid. The iron was cold in my sweating palm. My hand was shaking, the poker trembling with it. This was my weapon, a piece of fireplace cleaning equipment against whoever just slammed that door. I stood in the center of the room, holding the poker out in front of me. I listened. The silence had returned, heavier than before. It was listening back. Who's there? The words tore out of my throat, a rough, shaky whisper that sounded pathetic even to my own ears. I cleared my throat and tried again, louder this time, aiming my voice at the top of the stairs. Who's up there? Silence. Not a floorboard. Not a breath. He's waiting for me to come up. He's waiting in the dark. Fuck that. Fuck this house. Fuck the man in the car. I wasn't going up. I was getting out. I backed towards the front door, my eyes locked on the dark space at the top of the stairs. The poker was held in a two-handed grip now, a useless sliver of courage. I reached behind me, my hand fumbling for the doorknob. Something clicked in my head. A switch flipped. The fear was still there, a cold current under the surface, but it was being pushed down by a hot surge of anger. I was done being the mouse. I was done being led around by the nose, from one sick little scene to the next. Before I could think, I was moving. Not towards the door, towards the stairs. I took them two at a time, my feet pounding on the wood, the poker held high. All I could see was the darkness at the top landing. Adrenaline sang in my ears, drowning out everything else. I reached the top. A short hallway. 4 closed doors. One of them had to be the one that slammed. The one at the very end. I didn't hesitate. I ran down the hall and kicked. My foot connected with the wood just beside the knob. The lock splintered. The frame cracked. The door flew open, slamming against the inside wall. The room was empty. A single bed, stripped bare to the mattress. A dresser. A nightstand. Moonlight poured in through a wide-open window. The white curtains billowed inward, dancing in the sudden breeze from the hallway. They looked like frantic, waving arms. Someone was just here. Seconds ago. I lunged for the window, shoving the curtains aside. I leaned out, my heart hammering. I looked down into the backyard. A neat lawn, a swing set. Dark hedges lining the property. Nothing. No one. No running figure. No sound of snapping twigs. Just the cold, empty yard. He was gone. A ghost. The feeling of being so close to someone, of sharing the same space just moments apart, was worse than seeing them. It made my skin crawl. I pulled my head back in, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The adrenaline was fading, leaving a shaky, raw feeling behind. I had been outmaneuvered. Played with again. I turned back to the room, my eyes scanning every corner. My gaze fell on the windowsill. It was covered in a thick, undisturbed layer of dust except for where the curtains had brushed it clean in arcs. The moonlight hit it just right, illuminating the fine gray powder. And in the middle of the dust there was writing, not in ink, not in blood, traced by a finger. 2 small, neat words. Backquote. Not him, backquote. My mind snagged on the words. Not him. Not the man in the car. Who, then? Capiglayan. My eyes moved from the letters. Just to the right of them, pressed into the dust, was a mark. It was perfect. Clear. The delicate whorls and ridges of a fingerprint. Without thinking, my gaze dropped from the windowsill to my own hand, still clenched around the iron poker. I slowly, deliberately, uncurled my fingers. I turned my hand over, palm up. I looked at my right thumb. The pattern of lines, the central loop, the ridges, they were the same, a perfect match. The world outside the car window was a blur of dark shapes and smeared lights. My foot was pressed to the floor. The engine was a high-pitched whine that vibrated through the steering wheel, up my arms and into my skull, where it joined the pounding that had started back at the house. The fingerprint. My fingerprint. The image was burned onto the back of my eyelids. The whorls and ridges, clear as day in the dust. My thumb on the poker had been a mirror to the thumb on the windowsill. I risked a look in the rearview mirror. The street was empty behind me. The dark sedan was gone, but that meant nothing. It could be on a parallel street. It could be waiting up ahead. It could be anywhere. The man in the coat was a shadow who knew where I was going before I did. My headache pulsed in time with the flashing yellow lines on the asphalt. A hot nail being hammered into the base of my neck with every beat of my heart. I had to get away. Find a city, a crowd, a police station. But what would I say? Someone is making me visit houses. And I think I might have been there before, and my fingerprint was there. But it wasn't me. They would lock me in a padded room. My own hand. My own damned hand had betrayed me. How? I hadn't gone near the window until after I'd heard the slam. I had run upstairs, kicked in the door, and leaned out. The curtains had been blowing. The dust was thick. The writing, backquote, not him, backquote, was a message. And the print was a signature. A signature I didn't remember making. A wave of nausea rolled through me. I squeezed the steering wheel, my knuckles white. The road stretched on, a black ribbon disappearing into a blacker night. I was driving fast. Too fast. Trees whipped past in a solid wall of darkness. The thumping in my head grew louder, more insistent. It felt like something was trying to punch its way out from the inside. I blinked, just a quick, wet blink to clear my eyes. The sun was a bleed of orange and purple on the horizon. I lifted my foot off the accelerator. The car coasted. The engine noise died down to a low hum. My heart was a slow, heavy drum. Where was I? The road was different. A 2-lane country highway, cracked and uneven, flanked by fields of tall, dry corn. The sky was no longer a solid sheet of black. It was dusk. Or dawn. I looked at the dashboard clock. It was blank. The display was dead. How long had I been driving? Minutes? Hours? The panic from the house felt distant. A memory from another lifetime. My head didn't hurt anymore. The nail was gone. There was just a dull, thick feeling, like my head was wrapped in cotton. I had no memory of the last stretch of road. No memory of the sun setting. No memory of the headache fading. There was a gap, a hole in time, punched neatly out of my awareness. There was the blinding panic driving away from Oakwood Drive, the blinking of my eyes, and then this quiet road, this bruised sky. The silence in the car was suddenly huge. I reached for the radio, my hand moving on its own. The knob was cold. I clicked it on. Static hissed from the speakers, a waterfall of white noise. It was an ugly, abrasive sound. I turned it off. The hiss cut out. I took a deep breath, the air tasting of dust and old upholstery. My hands felt clammy. The radio clicked on again. The static was back, louder this time. A harsh, grating sound that filled the small space of the car. I stared at the radio dial. I hadn't touched it. My hands were on the steering wheel. I reached over and twisted the knob to off with more force this time. The static died. I waited. 1 second. 2. 5. Silence. Just the low rumble of the engine. A faulty wire. That's all it was. An old car with bad wiring. I let out the breath I was holding. My eyes drifted from the dashboard to the passenger seat. The map was still there, spread open. The paper was creased and worn. My own handwriting named the streets and the landmarks, a sick testament to a life I couldn't recall. My eyes traced the lines, the X's, the diner, the house on Oakwood Drive. There was another location further out, a drawing of a bridge with a jagged line through the middle. Next to it were the words, Broken Bridge. The words were circled, a thick, perfect circle, in red ink. The ink was glossy, mounded on the paper. It was still wet. My blood ran cold. That wasn't there before. I knew it. I would have seen it. I would have remembered a red circle. I leaned closer. A faint chemical smell rose from the ink. It was fresh, seconds old. It had been drawn while I was sitting here. No. The word was a whisper. No. No way. I slammed my foot on the brake. The tires locked. The car skidded on the loose gravel of the shoulder, slewing sideways before coming to a violent stop. My body was thrown against the seatbelt. Dust billowed up outside. I sat there, breathing hard, my chest tight. I stared at the red circle. It was a wound on the paper. A fresh wound. Who drew it? Huh? The question was a physical blow. The man in the coat wasn't here. The windows were up. The doors were locked. There was no one else in the car. There had been no one else in the car. My gaze darted around the cabin, looking for, what, a sign? An answer? There was nothing. Just me, the seat, the wheel, the dashboard, and the map with its impossible red circle. The fear changed then. It had been an external thing, a thing that chased me, a thing that waited in the dark. Now it was twisting inward. The threat wasn't just outside anymore. It was in the car with me. It was in the silence. It was in the gap in my memory, the lost time, the drive I couldn't remember. My eyes shot to the rearview mirror. I needed to see my face. I needed to see that I was still me. The mirror was a small, dark rectangle reflecting the dim interior of the car in the back window. My own eyes stared back wide and dark. My face was pale. There was a sheen of sweat on my forehead. For a single, electric moment, the reflection changed. The mouth, my mouth, pulled back at one corner. It wasn't a smile. It was a sneer. A confident, cruel, knowing expression of pure contempt. It was a look I had never seen on my own face. A look that belonged to a complete stranger. It was there for a fraction of a second, a flicker in the cheap glass, and then it was gone. My reflection was back to normal, just a scared man staring at himself. Ah, 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 animal sound tore out of my throat. I didn't think. I reacted. I drew back my right fist and smashed it into the rearview mirror. The sound was a sharp crack, followed by the tinkle of falling glass. The mirror shattered, a spider web of cracks erupting from the point of impact. Pain, white-hot and immediate, shot up my arm. I pulled my hand back. Shards of glass were embedded in my knuckles. Bright red blood welled up from a dozen small cuts, dripping onto the steering wheel, onto my jeans. The pain was real. The blood was real. It was an anchor in the storm of confusion that was tearing me apart. Who are you? I screamed, the words ripping my throat raw. I wasn't shouting at the empty road. I was shouting at the broken mirror, at the ghost that had looked back at me. What do you want? Leave me alone. The silence that answered was more terrible than any reply. I was alone in the car. I was screaming at myself. I hunched over the wheel, my bleeding hand cradled in my lap. The sharp sting of the glass in my skin was a constant, throbbing reminder. Glass. A shard of glass. My breath hitched, the world tilted, the edges of my vision going dark. A memory flared behind my eyes. It wasn't a thought, it was a sensation. The feel of smooth, cool paper under my left hand. The weight of a sharp object in my right. Not a pen, something flat and jagged. A piece of a broken picture frame. My arm moving, back and forth, back and forth. The sound, a dry, tearing scrape. The paper fibers giving way, shredding into a gray pulp. I could smell the dust from the mantelpiece. I could feel the cold brick against my hip as I leaned into the work. And I could feel the expression on my own face, the tightness in my cheeks, the pull at the corner of my mouth. It was the same sneer, the one from the mirror. I gasped, my body convulsing. I retched, but nothing came up. I was guck over the steering wheel, my forehead pressed against the hard plastic. Tears and sweat streamed down my face. It was me, in the house. That was my hand. I had destroyed the photograph. I had left the fingerprint. I had written the message. Backquote. Not him, backquote. It wasn't a warning about the man in the coat. It was a boast. It was me telling myself, telling this version of myself, that the man outside wasn't the one who had been in the room upstairs. I was. The other one was. I shoved the car door open, stumbling out onto the gravel shoulder. The evening air was cool and damp. I leaned over, my hands on my knees, and heaved. A thin, bitter fluid burned my throat. The world spun. I was two people. There was me, the one who was scared, the one who was running. And there was him. The one drawing on maps. The one scratching out faces in photographs. The one who had driven me here while I was blacked out. He was the one who would slam the bedroom door. He was a ghost inside my own skin. After a few minutes, the shaking subsided to a fine tremor. I wiped my mouth with the back of my good hand and staggered back to the car. My body felt weak, used up, like a puppet whose strings had been cut. I collapsed back into the driver's seat, the door swinging shut with a heavy thud. The interior smelled of my blood. I looked at the passenger seat, at the map. My creation, his road map. Something was lying next to it. It was small and red. It lay on the faded beige fabric of the seat, stark and clean. It hadn't been there before I got out of the car. I would have seen it. I would have noticed it as surely as I noticed the wet ink. It was a pen. A cheap, red, ballpoint pen with a clear plastic casing. The kind you get in a pack of 10. The pen that had drawn the circle. My fingers trembled as I reached for the passenger seat. The red pen was a sliver of plastic against the worn fabric. It was real. It was warm, as if it had just been held. I picked it up. The cheap plastic was smooth under my thumb. My thumb. The one with the fingerprint that had been on the dusty windowsill. I looked from the pen to the map, at the wet, red circle around the words, Broken Bridge. He had been here. Seconds ago. He had used my hand to draw his circle, then left the pen for me to find. A gift. A clue. A taunt. There was no choice. The car was a cage, and the map was the key. Driving was the only thing that felt like action, even if it wasn't my action. I threw the pen onto the map, turned the key, and pulled the car back onto the cracked highway. My injured hand throbbed in my lap, a dull, rhythmic beat. Each drop of blood that had fallen onto my jeans was a dark, drying star. The sky was the color of a day-old bruise. I drove. The cornfields gave way to sparse, skeletal trees. The road climbed, winding into low hills. I didn't look at the speedometer. I didn't look in the mirror. There was nothing to see in the shattered glass but a fractured version of myself, and I already knew I was broken. The bridge appeared suddenly, a dark slash against the dimming sky. It was exactly as the little drawing on the map had depicted. An old iron trestle bridge, rusted to a deep, angry orange. One side of it was ripped open, the guardrail hanging down into the chasm below like a broken jaw. A jagged line through the middle. My other self was a meticulous artist. I coasted to a stop a dozen yards from the entrance. The engine ticked as it cooled. The only other sound was a low whistle of wind moving through the ironwork. It was a lonely, mournful sound. I got out of the car. My legs felt unsteady. The air was colder up here. I walked to the edge of the asphalt, my shoes crunching on loose gravel. I looked down. The ravine was deep, a black throat choked with shadows and tangled undergrowth. I couldn't see the bottom. A fall from here would be the end of it. The thought held no comfort, only a flat emptiness. My eyes followed the line of the broken guardrail. The map had guided me here. He had guided me here. Why? My gaze drifted from the broken railing to the ground below it, on my side of the chasm. The map was a guide, a set of instructions. Follow the circle. I leaned over the edge of the road, my good hand gripping a cold chunk of rock to steady myself. My eyes scanned the weeds and dirt at the base of the bridge abutment. For a moment there was nothing, then a glint. A sliver of reflected light from the last vestiges of sunset, caught on something metallic. My body moved without a command from my mind. I found a rough path of erosion leading down the steep embankment. Dirt and pebbles slid under my feet. I half walked, half slid down, my jacket catching on thorns. I landed with a thud on the more level ground near the concrete footing of the bridge. The air was damp and smelled of wet earth and decay. The glint was closer now. I took 3 steps, my heart a slow, heavy hammer in my chest. Protruding from a clump of dead grass and mud was the curved end of a piece of iron. It was caked in dried dirt and rust. I knelt, my fingers brushed away the soil. It was heavy. I worked my hands underneath it and pulled. It came free with a thick, sucking sound. It was a crowbar, long, heavy, and cold. The metal was pitted and rough under my palm. The wedge end was chipped, and the claw was packed with ancient, hardened dirt. I stood up, holding it in my right hand. The weight felt familiar. The balance was perfect. It wasn't a strange object. It felt like an extension of my own arm. The fear I expected to feel, the revulsion, it wasn't there. There was just the weight of the iron. My fingers tightened around the shaft. And the world ripped open. The iron is heavy in my hand. Heavier. Newer. The paint is still flaking off, yellow and black underneath. My knuckles are white. The muscles in my forearm are cords of stone. I am standing on the bridge. Not at the edge of the road, but on the bridge itself. Near the railing, the same spot that is now a gaping hole. I can feel the vibration of the road through the soles of my shoes. A low rumble. Headlights are coming. Far down the road, 2 pinpricks of light growing larger. My left hand is braced on the top rail. I jam the wedge of the crowbar into the join between the steel post and the bridge deck. I put my weight into it. The metal groans. It resists. I grunt, a sound of effort and exhilaration. Sweat trickles down my temple. The headlights are closer now, illuminating the trees on the side of the road. I heave again. A sharp crack, loud as a gunshot. A bolt snaps. The post lurches sideways. The rumble is a roar now. The car is close. I work faster, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts. Pride swells in my chest. A feeling of immense power. The railing gives way with a final, screeching tear of metal. It falls, swinging out over the darkness. The headlights wash over me. I see the face of the driver. A woman. Eyes wide. Mouth open in a scream I can't hear over the engine. A tight, hard smile pulls at the corner of my mouth. The very same sneer from the broken mirror. My knees buckled. I dropped to the ground, the crowbar clattering on a rock beside me. I gasped for air, my throat closing up. What the hell was that? I whispered. The words were meaningless. I knew what it was. It was a memory. The car. The woman. I had done that. I had stood here and used this tool to break the bridge. I had watched her drive into the hole I had made. A wave of sickness washed over me, but underneath it something else stirred. A dark current. The memory of the power, of the exhilaration. My conscious mind recoiled from it. But a deeper part of me, a part that was growing stronger, savored it. It felt good. That feeling of control. I looked at the crowbar lying beside me. My hand twitched. I didn't push it away. Footsteps. On the gravel, up on the road. A single, distinct crunch. My head snapped up. A figure was standing at the far end of the bridge, a silhouette against the bruised purple sky. Even from this distance I knew him. The long coat. The way he stood. It was the man who had been outside the house on Oakwood Drive. The man who was hunting me. He was just standing there, watching me. He had found me again. He started walking, his steps slow and deliberate on the asphalt. He wasn't rushing, he had me trapped. There was nowhere to run. A cold, quiet calm settled over me. It was not the calm of acceptance or despair. It was something else, something hard and patient. I reached out, my fingers wrapping around the cold, familiar shaft of the crowbar. The texture of the rust felt right against my skin. I got to my feet, the crowbar held loosely at my side. I was no longer the man who had stumbled down the embankment. I was the man who had stood on the bridge. "You came back, you son of a bitch." His voice carried across the gap, low and full of gravel. It was a voice scraped raw by grief and anger. He stopped at the edge of the broken section, about 40 feet away. As he got closer, I could see his face, gaunt, unshaven, with eyes that burned with a furious, single-minded light. He raised his right hand. There was something in it, something black and metallic. A handgun. He pointed it directly at my chest. "Do you remember now?" he snarled. "Do you remember what you did to my family?" Panic. I waited for it. The frantic scrambling in my chest. The ice in my veins. It didn't come. The coldness inside me spread, extinguishing all the fear. It was like pouring water on a fire. All that was left was a clear, sharp focus. I looked at him, at the gun, at the fury twisting his features, and I felt nothing but a placid curiosity. I took a slow breath and stood up straight, shifting the weight of the crowbar in my hand. Then I started to laugh. It wasn't a loud sound. It started low in my chest, a quiet chuckle that grew into a steady, soft laugh. It was a sound of genuine amusement, a sound that didn't belong to the scared, confused man who had woken up in a strange house. The man with the gun, the man I now knew was named Bao. His face changed. The righteous certainty in his eyes flickered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. The hunter was confused by the prey's reaction. "Me?" I said. My own voice startled me. It was deeper, resonant. The hesitant tremor was gone, replaced by a smooth, confident tone. "I don't remember a thing." I took a step forward, moving from the dirt onto the asphalt of the bridge. The crowbar remained at my side, my knuckles white around it. "But, tell me about it." I smiled, feeling the familiar pull at the corner of my mouth, the sneer. It felt natural now. "It sounds like fun." Bao stared at me, his mouth open slightly. The hand holding the gun, which had been rock-steady, now had a fine tremor. He was aiming a weapon at a monster, but the monster wasn't cowering. It was curious. He had come here for a confrontation with a guilty man, a man he could terrorize and execute. He had not come here for this. He had not come here to find the thing that was looking back at him now, its eyes dark and empty of everything but a chilling interest. I took another step. "Your family?" I tilted my head, feigning thought. "Was it the woman in the car?" She screamed. I remember that much. A high, thin sound, like a rabbit. Bao flinched as if I had struck him. A raw sound of pain escaped his throat. You bastard!" I shrugged, a loose, easy motion of my shoulders. I started walking towards him, my pace unhurried. I let the tip of the crowbar drop to the ground. It scraped along the asphalt, the sound a harsh, grating screech that filled the air. A long white scar appeared on the black road behind me. The sound was nails on a chalkboard. It was the sound of a promise. "It's all a little hazy," I said, my voice conversational, friendly almost. The scraping of the iron was the only other sound. Scrap, scrap. Things got mixed up after that. A little knock on the head. I tapped my temple with the fingers of my free hand. "But I'm starting to feel much more like myself again, thanks to you." I kept walking. 10 feet away now. The barrel of his gun was a black hollow eye. It didn't scare me. It was an invitation. "So," I said, stopping just short of the broken gap in the bridge. I smiled wide, showing my teeth. "We can stand here and talk about old times. Or," I hefted the crowbar, feeling its satisfying weight, We could just do it again? For the first time since he had appeared, Bao moved. He took a step back. His retreat was more telling than any threat. A single backward step on the cracked asphalt. A small shift of weight, but it was enough. The hunter had lost his nerve. I didn't press the advantage. I didn't lunge across the gap or shout another taunt. I simply stood there, letting the silence and the scraping sound of the crowbar hang in the cold air between us. I lowered the heavy iron bar until its tip rested on the ground. A quiet gesture of patience. He stared at me, his chest rising and falling in ragged breaths. The gun in his hand was no longer a symbol of power. It was a desperate ward against something he didn't understand. He had come here to kill a man. He had found something else. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Without another word, he turned and faded back into the deepening twilight. The sound of a car door opening and slamming shut was a distant, hollow punctuation. An engine growled to life. And then there was only the sound of tires on gravel, growing fainter and fainter, until once again the only sound was the wind keening through the broken iron bones of the bridge. I stood alone for a long time. The sneer, the confidence, the resonant voice, they evaporated like mist, leaving behind a chilling residue. My knees went weak. The crowbar felt impossibly heavy, a foreign object of immense wrongness. I let it fall from my grasp. It clattered onto the road, the sound obscenely loud in the quiet. I stumbled back to my own car, my body a machine running on fumes. Each step was a conscious effort. I fell into the driver's seat. My hands shook so violently I could barely fit the key into the ignition. What was that? What was that voice? It wasn't me. It couldn't have been me. But the memory of the feeling, the cold, clear focus, the utter absence of fear, the thrilling sense of control, it lingered. Buried deep under the panic and the revulsion, a part of me had enjoyed it. A part of me missed it already. I drove. I had no destination beyond the next red circle on the map. It was the only scripture I had. The road unwound in the dark, a gray ribbon swallowed by the headlights. My mind was a war zone, the terrified man who woke up in a strange house, the man I thought I was, cowered in one corner. In the other, the thing that had faced down a gun and laughed, paced like a caged animal, impatient and hungry. It wanted out again. The landscape changed from sparse hills to a flat, industrial wasteland. The air began to smell of chemicals and rust. The map led me off the highway, onto a cracked service road overgrown with weeds. In the distance, a shape rose against the starless sky. A massive, skeletal silhouette of a factory complex. Smokestacks like broken fingers clawed at the night. Broken windows stared out like 1,000 vacant eyes. This was the place. The final X on the map wasn't an X. It was a crude drawing of a box, a rectangle. The factory. I parked the car 50 yards from a gaping hole in a chain-link fence. The engine ticked as it cooled. I got out. The crowbar remained on the floor of the back seat. I couldn't bring myself to touch it again. As I walked, my foot kicked something on the passenger side floor mat. I looked down. It was a crumpled piece of paper, a cheap flyer. For lease. Secure warehouse space, a one industrial park. Just trash left by the car's previous owner. I shoved it under the seat with my shoe, trying to force the simple, mundane explanation to fit. Trying to ignore the cold knot forming in my stomach. The air inside the fence was thick and still. My footsteps on the gravel were the only sound. I found an unlocked side door, its metal groaning in protest as I pushed it open. I stepped inside. The space was cavernous. A cathedral of decay. Moonlight lanced through the shattered skylights, illuminating thick blankets of dust and casting long, distorted shadows. The smell of stale oil and damp concrete filled my lungs. My eyes adjusted to the gloom. I could see huge, dead machines sleeping under tarps, catwalks crisscrossing the darkness high above, and in the center of the vast concrete floor, a collection of 55-gallon drums. There were 10 of them, arranged in 2 perfect rows of 5. A rectangle. I stopped breathing. I pulled the map from my jacket pocket. My hand was steady. I smoothed it out. There, next to the icon for the factory, was the drawing. A small, smudged rectangle. He had been here. He had arranged this. He had planned this. It wasn't just a map to my past. It was a script. A stage, with props set just so. My gaze swept the floor around the barrels. Something lay near the base of one of them. A small, dark square. I walked toward it, my boots crunching on fallen plaster. The sound echoed in the immense space. I knelt. It was a wallet. Old, worn black leather. Not mine. My own was in my pocket, holding an ID with a face I didn't recognize. I picked this one up. It felt heavy. I opened it. The plastic window of the ID slot showed a driver's license. The name read, Bao Nguyen, the man from the bridge. I felt a jolt. Not of surprise, but of confirmation. I thumbed through the pockets. A few dollars. A credit card. And a photograph. A man, a woman, and a small girl with a bright, gap-toothed smile. They were standing in front of a small house with a tidy lawn. The man was Bao. The woman was beautiful. I recognized her instantly. She was the woman from my flashback. The driver. The face behind the windshield, mouth open in a scream I couldn't hear. In the photograph, her face had been violently scratched out. Deep gouges in the glossy paper, dug with a nail or a key, obliterating her features into a mess of white pulp. A great sickness rose in my throat. I did this. I ruined this family. I ruined this picture. The thought was a physical blow, but it was followed by something else. A low thrum of warmth deep in my chest. A dark, ugly ember of pride. The memory of doing it. The feeling of the key in my hand, scraping and scraping. It felt thorough. This is a trap. The words came out as a whisper, the voice of the scared man. He's luring me in. But the other voice, my voice, answered in the back of my mind. This is home. Then it happened. A sound like a cannon shot. An immense, booming slam that shook the very air. The side door I'd come through slammed shut. I spun around, my heart hammering against my ribs. A moment later, another sound. A heavy, metallic shunk. A bar dropping into place on the outside. I was locked in. Before I could process it, a series of clicks and buzzes echoed from above. One by one, long rows of fluorescent lights flickered to life. They hummed and whined, flooding the factory with a stark, sterile white light that banished the shadows and revealed every inch of the rust and ruin. The sudden brightness was blinding. I threw a hand over my eyes. A crackle of static erupted from speakers mounted high on the walls. Then, a voice, Bao's voice, distorted and amplified, filled the cavernous space. This is the end, you filthy son of a bitch. I told you I'd find you. Now you're gonna pay for what you did. In here, with me. The voice cut off, replaced by the low hum of the lights. The trap was sprung. He was here, somewhere, watching. He wanted me to be afraid. He wanted me to run, to hide, to cower. I waited for the fear. I waited for the ice to flood my veins. It didn't come. A slow smile spread across my face. It felt easy. It felt right. I let the wallet drop from my fingers onto the concrete floor. The sound was a small, final click. I didn't feel like the scared man anymore. I felt like myself. A trap? I whispered to the empty air, the words swallowed by the vastness. My own voice, deep and smooth, was a comfort. But for who? I didn't seek cover. I didn't press myself against a wall or look for an exit. I walked deliberately to the very center of the factory floor, into the open space between the rows of barrels. I stood directly under the harsh glare of the lights, a single figure on a massive stage. I tilted my head back and looked up at the maze of dark catwalks above. Bow! My voice boomed, echoing off the high steel ceiling. There was no quaver in it, only a cheerful, ringing clarity. Is this hide and seek? It's been so long since I've played. I love this game. Silence, only the ceaseless hum. I'll even count, I called out, my voice laced with amusement. 1, 2, 3. I let the numbers hang in the air. Then, I put my lips together and began to whistle. It wasn't a nervous sound. It was a clear, melodic tune. A simple, childlike melody. The tune, from a music box. The sound was cheerful and completely out of place. A thread of pure, unadulterated menace weaving through the industrial silence. I whistled as I walked, my pace unhurried, my hands loose at my sides. High above, a shape detached itself from the shadows of a steel girder. Bao. He stepped into the light on a catwalk, about 40 feet up. He raised the handgun with both hands. I stopped whistling and looked up at him, a wide, friendly grin on my face. The gun was pointed at my chest, but it was shaking violently. The confident hunter was gone. In his place was a terrified man who had lured a beast into his den, only to realize he had locked himself in with it. He was the prey now. He knew it. "You're not supposed to do this," he stuttered, his voice small without the aid of the speakers. "You're supposed to be scared." "I was," I said, my tone conversational. "But I'm feeling much better now. Thank you for that." I continued my slow, methodical walk, my gaze sweeping the area. I wasn't looking for an escape. I was surveying my new playground. My eyes landed on a wall near the massive, sealed main doors. A metal box was mounted there, an electrical panel. Old, gray, and covered in dust. A main breaker switch, large and black, jutted from its center. I walked over to it, never taking my eyes off Bao. He tracked me with the quavering gun. He didn't shoot. He couldn't. His certainty was shattered. He was aiming at a man who should be pleading for his life, but was instead acting as if he owned the place. I reached the panel. My fingers brushed the dust from the heavy plastic switch. I gave Bao one last look, one last smile. "Let's make this more interesting," I said, and I threw the switch. The world vanished. The humming fluorescent lights died with a final, collective pop, plunging the entire factory into absolute blackness. The sudden absence of light was a physical shock. For a full second there was nothing. No light, no sound. Then, a new sound began. A rhythmic backquote. "Cump, cump, W-H-U-ump," backquote. A single red emergency light mounted on the ceiling began to strobe. It painted the entire factory in demonic pulses of red light and deep, impenetrable shadow. Red, black, red, black. In the flashes of light, the machines and barrels became monstrous, shifting shapes. The catwalks became jagged slashes of crimson against the dark. It was a nightmare landscape. I found a small, boxy PA microphone on the wall next to the panel. I keyed the button, heard the familiar pop and crackle from the speakers high above. My voice, now a low, intimate whisper, slithered from every speaker in the vast, dark space. "Ready or not, Bao." The red light flashed, illuminating my empty spot on the floor. I was already gone, swallowed by the darkness I had just created. "Here I come." The darkness was a solid thing. The hum of the dead lights faded into an impossible quiet, leaving only the memory of their buzz. Then the first red pulse hit. W-H-Yump. For a fraction of a second the world existed. A hellscape of steel and rust, painted in blood. Wump. Then it was gone, swallowed by a blackness deeper than before. Wump. A slow, relentless heartbeat. Red. Black. Red. Black. This was a better stage. More intimate. I moved with the blackness, a shadow among shadows. My feet made no sound on the concrete floor. The air tasted of rust and old electricity. From the catwalk high above there was a scuffling sound, the frantic scraping of a shoe on steel. Bao was moving. Good. A stationary target is no fun at all. I glided toward the far end of the cavernous room, my eyes adjusting with each scarlet flash. The layout of the factory was etched in my mind, as clear as the map that led me here. It was a comfortable, familiar space. I found what I was looking for, a pile of discarded steel conduits, long and hollow. I picked one up. It was heavy, solid, just right. Taking aim at a large sheet metal wall about 50 feet away, I waited for the pulse of black. I swung the pipe with all my strength. The clang was magnificent. It ripped through the rhythmic silence, an explosive, metallic thunder that echoed off every surface. A sound so loud it felt physical. A muzzle flash answered from above. A pop and bang that was instantly swallowed by the vastness of the space. The bullet whined off a steel I-beam somewhere to my left and went zinging off into the darkness. A waste. A lovely, panicked waste of a bullet. He was shooting at ghosts. I let the conduit drop. It created another satisfying racket. I was already moving, slipping between two enormous, tarp-covered shapes that felt like sleeping elephants. I found the control panel. It was an old one, with heavy, chunky buttons and levers, all labeled with faded plastic tags. Conveyor 2 main, stamping press 7, particle grinder, a beautiful instrument panel, waiting for a conductor. I waited. Let the silence stretch out again. Let him listen to the drip, drip, drip of water from a broken pipe somewhere, a sound that was suddenly as loud as a hammer. Let him hear his own breathing, ragged and sharp. The red light flashed on his position. He was crouched behind a stack of rusted oil drums, the gun held out in a shaking two-handed grip. He was trying to shrink, to make himself small. My laugh started low in my chest. I didn't shout it. I let it bubble up, a sound of pure amusement. I leaned close to the PA microphone I'd found earlier. "Missed me," my voice whispered. It didn't boom this time. It coiled out of the speakers above his head, a soft conspiratorial hiss that was everywhere at once. "Bad shot." His head jerked up. The gun barrel swept wildly across the dark catwalks. He had no idea where the sound came from. While his attention was elsewhere, my finger found the lever for Conveyor 4. It was the belt line that ran directly behind his hiding spot. I yanked it down. There was a low groan, a shudder that ran through the floor, and then the screech of a frozen chain being forced into motion. S-C-R-E-E-E-E-E-E-E-E-E-E-E. The sound was a physical assault. Bao yelped and scrambled away from the noise, stumbling over a loose piece of metal. He fell hard on his side. The conveyor belt, a wide river of black rubber, began to inch forward, its ancient motor whining in protest. Red light flashed across its surface. Black. Red. Black. Moving inexorably toward a dark maw in the wall. "What the fuck?" he breathed, his voice a raw scratch of terror. He got to his feet, crab walking backward. "Shit! You're controlling the factory!" Of course I was. He had brought me to my workshop. He had locked me inside my favorite toolbox. He was no longer the hunter. He was just another component to be processed. Now, for the overture. My hands flew across the control panel. No more subtlety. It was time for the symphony. Chunk. A stamping press on the far side of the factory roared to life. A piston the size of a car slammed down onto an empty press bed. Kerchunk! A pause. Kerchunk! The sound beat in time with the pulsing red light. Where? I threw another switch. A different conveyor, this one high above the floor, carrying a collection of rusted hooks, began to move. The hooks swayed and danced in the strobing light, a procession of skeletal fingers. Grind, rattle, clatter. More switches, more levers. A rock crusher intended for slag began to chew on nothing, its metal jaws clashing with a deafening roar. A sorting machine began to shake violently, sending a shower of old bolts and washers raining down onto the tin roof of a small office. The noise was building, layer upon layer of industrial chaos. It was no longer a collection of separate sounds. It was one monstrous, brain-hammering wall of noise. The entire building vibrated. The floor hummed under my feet. Through the maelstrom, I could see Bao. He was completely lost. The strobing red light, combined with the cacophony, was a weapon of disorientation. He would turn toward one sound, and another, louder one would erupt behind him. He looked small and helpless, a rat in a maze of roaring, moving steel. "Come out, you coward!" he screamed. His voice was a thin thread, instantly shredded and devoured by the mechanical orchestra. He was shouting into a hurricane. He fired the gun again, a pointless flash of light and a pop that was utterly insignificant. He was crumbling. The fear had turned to rage, and the rage was curdling into pure, mindless panic. He was trapped not by walls, but by sound and light. I watched him for another minute, savoring it. Savoring the way his body flinched with every Kerchunk of the press, savoring the wild, hunted look in his eyes as they darted from one moving shadow to the next. He was a beautiful sight. But the overture was over. It was time for the main performance. I flipped a final switch, killing the PA system. Then I slipped away from the control panel, melting back into the deepest shadows at the base of a huge, silent metal lathe. I stayed low, moving with a fluid purpose. I knew where he was going. He was instinctively moving toward the only place that seemed stable. The wide, open center of the factory floor, away from the moving machinery at the edges. A fatal mistake. The open ground offers no cover. He stumbled into the relative quiet of the central clearing, panting, the gun held loosely at his side. The noise was still deafening, but it was a perimeter of sound now. Here, in the middle, he could almost think. He stood there, turning in a slow circle, trying to find a target in the strobing madness. I didn't give him the chance. I exploded from the darkness behind the lathe, a silent, charging bull. My shoulder connected with his spine with a wet, meaty thud. The air left his lungs in a whoosh. The gun flew from his hand, skittering across the concrete. We went down in a heap, a tangle of limbs. But I didn't stop. I used our momentum, rolling us over and over across the dusty floor until we hit something with a soft thud and a jerk. Conveyor belt 7. The one leading to the gears. It was already moving. A slow, steady crawl. I had activated it before I left the panel. A private ride for 2. I was on top, my weight pinning him down. His panic gave him a surge of strength. He bucked and thrashed, his fists hammering a frantic, weak rhythm against my back. I ignored it. I wrapped one hand around his throat, not to choke him, but just to hold him still, to make him look at me. The red light pulsed across my face. Black. Red. Black. I gave him a wide, reassuring smile. His eyes went wide with a new kind of horror, the horror of recognition. Not of my face, but of my expression. The complete absence of anger or fear. He wasn't fighting a man anymore, he was pinned by a natural disaster. He screamed then, a raw, re-churmy koa. He drove a knee into my ribs. Pain flared, sharp and hot, but I barely registered it. The belt carried us onward, past a dangling work light, past a stack of pallets. The sound of the factory was our background music, and ahead of us, a new sound was growing louder, a rhythmic, heavy meshing of teeth. Chunka 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 chunk. The primary crusher gears, they were beautiful. 2 massive interlocking cylinders of blackened steel, each tooth as thick as my arm, stained with ancient grease. They turned with a slow, relentless power, a mouth designed to pulverize solid rock into dust. They were now less than 10 feet from his head, his eyes locked onto them. The fight went out of him, replaced by a primal, absolute terror. This was it. This was the end he had imagined for me. Now it was his. No! He shrieked, his voice cracking. He planted both feet on my sternum, his legs coiled like springs. He put every ounce of his terror, every scrap of his will to live, into one final, explosive push. The force of the kick sent me flying backward. I landed hard on the concrete floor, the air knocked out of me for a second time. He had succeeded. He had pushed me off. He didn't waste the opportunity. He scrambled to his knees and rolled off the side of the conveyor belt, collapsing onto the floor just as the spot where his head had been passed into the grinding maw of the gears. He lay there, gasping, coughing up dust, his body shaking uncontrollably. He had survived. For a moment. I got to my feet. I wasn't hurt, merely inconvenienced. I brushed the dust from my jacket and pants, a simple, domestic gesture. He watched me, his eyes wide with disbelief, as he pushed himself backward on all fours, trying to get away. I walked over to the spot where his gun had fallen. I picked it up. It felt good in my hand. Balanced. I checked the magazine. 3 rounds left. Then my eyes caught a glint of metal near a puddle of oily water. His keys. The ones to the car parked out front. They must have fallen from his pocket during our tumble. I strolled over and picked them up, the small, metal teeth cold against my palm. Bao had managed to get to his feet. He was leaning against a pillar, his chest heaving. He saw what I was holding. A flicker of something. Hope? A plan? Flashed in his eyes. The exit. His car. Escape. I held the keys up so he could see them clearly in the next pulse of red light. I gave a little shrug, as if to say, "Oops, you dropped these." Then, with a casual underhand toss, I threw them. They sailed in a gentle arc and disappeared into the churning, hungry mouth of the crusher gears. There was no dramatic sound. Just a brief, sharp crunch. A spit of metal fragments. And then, they were gone. Obliterated. Reduced to shavings and dust, mixed with old grease. I turned my full attention back to him. The hope in his eyes died, replaced by a hollow, final understanding. I let the corner of my mouth curl up into a slight smile. The strobing red light washed over us. Red. Black. Red. Black. You're not going anywhere. The smile felt wrong on my face. A stretch of muscles I didn't command. My lips were pulled back from my teeth in a dry grimace. Why was I smiling? The factory roared around me, a symphony of grinding metal and percussive slamming that vibrated through the soles of my shoes and into my bones. Strobing red light painted the world in flashes of rust and danger. Red. Black. Red. Black. A gun was in my hand. Heavy. Cold. Unfamiliar. My finger was resting on the trigger guard. A position that felt horrifically natural. Across the vast concrete floor, maybe 40 feet away, a man was pressed against a steel support pillar. He was shaking, his chest heaving, his eyes wide and fixed on me. On the gun. Who was he? Who was I? The questions were a silent scream in my head, but no sound came out. The deafening noise of the machinery swallowed everything. I took a step and he flinched like a cornered animal. My own movement felt alien, a puppet's lurch. I didn't want to move toward him. I didn't want this gun. I wanted the noise to stop. The man pushed himself off the pillar. He scrambled away, stumbling over his own feet, his gaze never leaving me. He was a silhouette against the pulsing red glow, a frantic shape moving through a nightmare. He disappeared behind a mountain of machinery, a dark shape that looked like a giant, sleeping metal beast. A moment later, I heard it. A distant slam of a metal door, then the scrape of something heavy, a desperate, grating sound of metal dragging across concrete. He had found a room. He had locked himself in. I was alone again on the factory floor. Alone with the noise. The chaos. The gun. I looked down at it. A black, ugly weight. I opened my hand and let it drop. It hit the concrete with a clatter that was sharp but instantly lost in the greater din. Then, a new sound. Or rather, an unsound. Kerchunk. A pause. The colossal stamping press on the far side of the factory cycled down. The rhythmic slam that had been a part of the world a second ago was gone. The silence it left behind was a physical hole in the air. Wait, a rar. A high-pitched whine sputtered and died. The conveyor of hooks above me shuddered to a halt, the hooks swinging gently in the dying momentum. One by one, the machines were powering down. The rock crusher's metallic chewing ceased with a final shuddering grind. The sorting machine's violent shaking stopped. The wall of noise was being dismantled, layer by layer, until only the relentless whump-whump-whump of the single red emergency light and the steady drip-drip-drip of water from a broken pipe remained. The quiet was worse. 1,000 times worse. In the noise there was no room to think. In the quiet, the questions came flooding back. Where am I? What is this place? The smell of rust and old oil filled my lungs. My heart was a frantic hammer against my ribs, a sound I could now hear clearly. I was wearing a leather jacket that felt too big on my shoulders. My hands were scraped and dirty. I looked at the steel door the man had disappeared through. It was a small, reinforced office door, set into the base of a huge concrete platform. I could see the scuff marks on the floor where he dragged a heavy metal cabinet in front of it. He was trapped. Or I was trapped. I wasn't sure which. I took a hesitant step toward it. My throat was dry. I needed to know. I had to know. Hello? My voice was a weak croak, swallowed by the huge space. I cleared my throat, the sound raw and loud in the new quiet. Please. What happened? Silence from behind the door. Only the drip, drip, drip. I don't remember anything, I said, my voice trembling, breaking. The words were the truest things I knew. My head. There's nothing there. Please, who are you? Why were you running from me? I pressed my forehead against the cold steel of the door. It was solid, unmoving. Why did I have a gun? A long minute passed. I could hear my own ragged breathing echo slightly. I was about to turn away, to sink into the terrifying blankness of my own mind, when a voice came from the other side. Muffled, full of hate. You know who I am. No, I swear I don't. The denial was a desperate cry. Tears started to well in my eyes, hot and sharp. I woke up standing here. There was noise, a smile on my face. I don't know why. Please, just tell me. Tell me what's going on. Another long silence. I could almost feel him thinking on the other side of that door, weighing my words. The dripping of the water was a maddeningly slow clock. You really don't know, he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of dawning, horrified realization. Oh God, you really don't know. Know what? I pleaded. Tell me. My name is Bao, the voice said. The words strained, each one costing him something. I'm a prosecutor. Or I was. Before you. A choked sound, half sob, half laugh. 2 years ago, I was prosecuting a case, a fraud and racketeering case against a real piece of work, a sociopath named Kai. The name meant nothing to me. It was just a sound. The case was airtight, Bao continued, his voice growing stronger, fueled by a rage that burned through the steel door. We had him. He was going to go away for a long, long time. He tried everything. Threats, bribes, nothing worked. So he decided to send a message. To me. To make me drop the case. I slid down the door, my back scraping against the cold metal, until I was sitting on the grimy concrete. I hugged my knees to my chest, trying to make myself smaller. He followed my wife, Bao said, his voice cracking on the word wife. He learned her routine. He knew the route she took to pick up our daughter from her piano lesson every Tuesday. The route that took her over the old trestle bridge out on Highway 9. The locals called it Broken Bridge. Broken Bridge. The name sparked something. Not a memory. More like the ghost of a memory. A flicker of an image. Splintered wood, the glint of water far below. So fast I couldn't be sure I'd seen it. He knew she would be on that bridge at 4:15 p.m. He tampered with her car earlier in the day. A clean cut to the brake line. But that wasn't enough for him. He wanted to be sure. He wanted to watch. He waited for them in a stolen truck on the far side of the bridge. When her car came across, he drove right into it, head on. My breath hitched. A cold dread, heavy and physical, was settling in my stomach. He hit them so hard it pushed their car through the wooden guardrail. Bao's voice was a raw whisper of pain now. They went over the side, a 70-foot drop into the river. He didn't stick around, he just drove away. But someone saw the truck. The police found it abandoned a mile away. Your fingerprints were all over the steering wheel, Kai. No, I whispered, shaking my head, even though no one could see me. No, no, no. It couldn't be me. I wouldn't. I couldn't. They died, Bao said, his voice flat, devoid of all emotion now. My wife, Lynn, and my daughter, Mai. She was 7. She loved ladybugs. She had this little music box that played Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. She took it everywhere. A memory slammed into me. Not a flicker this time, but a solid, searing image. A small, wooden box in my hands. A ballerina, turning under glass. The tinny, sweet melody. I'd found it in a rundown apartment. It felt important. I didn't know why. Now I did. Oh God, now I did. A wave of nausea washed over me. I felt like I was going to be sick. The guilt was an ocean, and I was drowning in it. But you got away, Bao spat. The crash looked like an accident. The tampered brakes, the collision. It was all messy. Your high-priced lawyers created enough doubt. You walked. You disappeared. I lost my job. I lost everything. I've spent the last 2 years looking for you. Forgetting wasn't an option. Then I found that goddamn map you made. Your road to recovery. A trail leading back to all your little hideouts. All your crimes. And I followed it. I followed you, you son of a bitch. I was going to do to you what you did to them. Make you suffer. Make you remember. You are a monster. The word hung in the air. Monster. My body convulsed with a sob. It tore out of my throat, a sound of pure agony. The truth was a physical weight, crushing my chest, stealing my breath. I was a murderer. I had killed a woman. I had killed a little girl over a court case. The horror of it was absolute. I deserved to die. I deserved everything he had planned for me. The tears streamed down my face, mixing with the grime on my cheeks. I was broken, a shell filled with a crime so vast I couldn't comprehend it. And then, something else. Deep inside the screaming whirlwind of my guilt, a different voice spoke. It was calm, amused. See? It whispered. He's telling our story. He remembers every detail. I flinched. Whose voice was that? It was inside my head. All that crying, the voice continued, a soothing, reasonable murmur. It's so weak. That isn't you. You aren't the one who weeps. You're the one who makes others weep. Shut up, I whispered, my lips barely moving. Bao must have heard something. What? He called from behind the door. What did you say? He thinks he's the hunter, the inner voice mocked. He found our map. He followed our breadcrumbs. He locked us in our own playground and thinks he's in control. He did exactly what we wanted him to do. The story Bao had told, the horror of it began to change. The guilt was still there, a thin, screaming shell, but underneath it something else was growing. a warmth, a feeling of satisfaction. The memory of the crash wasn't a source of pain anymore. It was a source of pride. The planning, the execution, the power of it, the memory of walking away, leaving the chaos behind. That was freedom. That was strength. The weeping stopped. A strange clarity was settling over me. The 2 years of fog, of confusion, of being this weak, scared thing. It was all a temporary illness, a side effect of some accident I couldn't quite recall. An annoying reset. But now Bao had rebooted the system. He had reminded me of who I am. A long silence stretched out. The dripping water was the only sound. "On!" Bao's voice called out. He called me by the wrong name. He sounded uncertain. "Are you still there? Are you listening to me?" The remnants of the scared, crying man he had been talking to were dissolving like smoke. I felt him fade, a final, pathetic whimper of terror in the back of my mind before he was gone completely. And I was here, whole again. A small chuckle escaped my lips. It was a low, pleasant sound, full of genuine amusement. It was the sound of a key finally turning in a lock that had been rusted shut for far too long. From inside the room, I heard a sharp intake of breath. I slowly, deliberately, got to my feet. I rolled my shoulders, feeling the comfortable weight of the leather jacket. It fit perfectly. My body felt right again. Strong. The factory wasn't a nightmare anymore. It was a toolbox. I looked at the steel door. At the scuff marks on the floor. My voice when I spoke was nothing like the weak, trembling thing it had been moments before. It was calm, measured, full of a quiet power that seemed to press against the very steel of the door. "Thank you, Bao," I said, "for the reminder." I turned and walked over to the spot where I'd seen the pile of discarded steel conduits earlier. I picked one up, a solid 3-foot length of pipe. It had a pleasing weight in my hands. I tested its balance, swinging it gently. It felt good. An extension of my will. I walked back to the door. A frantic scraping sound came from inside. He was trying to push the cabinet, to add more weight. He understood. Too late. Boom. I swung the pipe with the full force of my body. The impact was a deafening metallic thunderclap that echoed through the entire factory. The steel door bucked in its frame, a deep dent appearing where the pipe had struck. Dust shook loose from the concrete ceiling above. The sound was magnificent. I smiled. A real smile this time. It felt like coming home. I raised the pipe again, my muscles coiling. Now I remember. The pipe was a beautiful thing. A perfect length of galvanized steel, cold and heavy in my hands. I'd swung it like a pendulum, a wrecking ball, and the factory had answered with a chorus of glorious echoing thunder. Boom! The steel door shrieked and dented. Boom! A spiderweb of stress fractures appeared around the lock plate. I could feel the impact travel from the door, through the pipe, and up my arms into the core of my body. It was a transfer of energy, of will. It was invigorating. The man inside, Cole he called himself, was making small, panicked sounds. A whimper. The scrape of a heavy object on concrete. He was trying to reinforce his little cage. It was adorable. I swung again, my entire body twisting into the motion, putting my hips and shoulders into the blow. Boom. The sound was bigger this time. Deeper. A sheet of rust flaked off the door and fell to the floor like red snow. I laughed, a short, sharp bark of pure joy. This was what I had been missing. This clarity, this purpose, this raw, physical expression of dominance. The 2 years of fog were a bad dream. A dull, gray sickness. Cole, the prosecutor, had been the cure. His story, his hatred, his fear. They were the smelling salts that had woken me from my slumber. I was about to wind up for another swing, one that would surely tear the lock from its mooring, when a new idea surfaced. It was a better idea. A more elegant one. Smashing a door down was work. It was satisfying, yes, but it was the tool of a brute. I was not a brute. I was an artist. I stopped. The sudden absence of the cacophony was more jarring than the noise itself. The echoes of the last impact faded, leaving only the steady drip, drip, drip of the broken pipe somewhere in the darkness. Silence descended upon the factory floor like a thick blanket. From inside the office, the frantic scraping stopped. I could picture him, frozen, ear pressed against the buckled steel, listening, waiting, wondering why the assault had ceased. The silence was a new kind of pressure. The booming was a threat you could understand, brace for. Silence was a question mark. It held infinite, terrifying possibilities. I leaned the steel pipe against the wall, its end scraping the concrete with a soft grind. I didn't need it anymore. I turned and walked away from the door, my footsteps quiet on the dusty floor. My eyes, now fully accustomed to the gloom, scanned the landscape of dormant machinery. The single red emergency light still pulsed, sweeping its bloody gaze across the room in a slow, hypnotic rhythm. Red, black, red, black. It painted long, distorted shadows that writhed and danced like living things. I wasn't an intruder in this nightmare anymore. I was its architect. My gaze settled on the huge concrete platform a few yards away, the one the office was built into. High above, near the ceiling, a network of large, square ventilation ducts snaked through the rafters like metallic serpents. I saw it immediately. A service ladder, bolted to the side of the platform. Maintenance access. I walked to the ladder and began to climb. The metal rungs were cold and gritty under my hands. It was an easy ascent. My body felt light, capable. The leather jacket moved with me, a comfortable second skin. At the top of the platform, I was level with the machinery, looking down on the factory floor. It was a playground of steel and shadow. I could see the dented office door from here, a small, insignificant detail in the vastness of the space. The main ventilation trunk was wide enough to crawl through. I found an access panel held in place by 4 simple wing nuts. They were stiff with rust and disuse, but my fingers were strong. They twisted, groaning in protest, until they came free. I slid the heavy metal panel aside. A gust of cold, stale air washed over my face, carrying the smell of dust and dead insects. I slid into the ductwork. It was pitch black inside. The metal was cold against my stomach and elbows as I began to crawl. The sound of my movement was amplified in the enclosed space. A low shuffling and the soft click of my jacket zipper against the metal. I moved by feel, following the straight line of the main duct. I knew where it had to lead. An office, a control room. It would need ventilation. It would have an intake grate. I crawled for what felt like 50 or 60 feet. The darkness was absolute, a void that swallowed all light and sense of direction. But I was not directionless. I had a target. Then, I heard it. A faint sound from below. A choked, ragged breath. Another. He was trying to control his breathing, trying to stay quiet. He was listening for me at the door. A smile spread across my face there in the dark. It was time for the overture. I stopped moving. I took a breath. And I began to whistle. The tune was simple. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. The same tune from the little girl's music box. The melody came out clear and pure. A thin, piercing thread of sound cutting through the oppressive quiet of the factory. I whistled it slowly, deliberately, letting each note hang in the air before moving to the next. The sound would travel down the ductwork, a disembodied nursery rhyme delivered from the heavens. It wasn't coming from the door, it was coming from everywhere. From the very air in his little room. I heard a sharp gasp from below, a sudden, terrified intake of air, then the sound of a chair scraping as he scrambled to his feet. "No," a voice whispered, so faint I could barely hear it through the metal. "No, no." I kept whistling, crawling forward again. I pitched the sound higher, making it sound more like the tinny melody of the cheap music box. A few more feet, and my hand touched it, a square grate, screwed into the bottom of the duct. I was directly above him. I stopped whistling. The silence that followed was broken by a new sound. A frantic fumbling. The metallic click-clack of a magazine being slammed into the base of a handgun. The slide racking back with a sharp snick. He was armed. Good. That would make it more poignant. I felt for the screws holding the grate in place. They were old, standard flatheads. I pulled the small, folded multi-tool from my pocket. The little girl's father had been a handyman. It was one of the items I'd collected from his apartment after the accident. It felt appropriate to use his own tools. The screwdriver bit flipped out with a click. It took only a minute. The screws were old and gave way easily. I pushed on the grate. It dropped with a loud clang onto the floor of the room below. It was followed by a panicked shout and the sound of something tumbling over. Cole had jumped back, knocking over his chair. I looked down through the square hole. It was a cramped, bleak office. A single desk, an old computer monitor, and a metal filing cabinet pushed uselessly against the buckled door. Cole was pressed into the far corner, his back to the wall, the gun in his hands. It was shaking violently. His eyes were wide, staring up at the dark hole in the ceiling, his face a mask of disbelief and horror. The single emergency light from outside pulsed through the room's small, barred window, bathing everything in flashes of red. He was a cornered rat. I swung my legs through the opening and dropped down, landing lightly on my feet. The drop was only about 8 feet. I straightened up, brushing dust from my jacket. I hadn't brought a weapon. I didn't need one. My hands were empty. I just stood there, in the center of the small room, and looked at him. "This map," I said, my voice calm, conversational. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the crumpled, stained piece of paper. The map he'd found. My map. I held it up for him to see. It wasn't a road to recovery. His eyes darted from me to the map, and back. The gun in his hands looked like a child's toy. "It's a ritual," I continued, taking a slow step toward him. He flinched, shuffling his feet, pressing himself harder against the corner. "Each location, the apartment, the bridge, this factory, each one is a memory, a piece of the story, a piece of me." I took another step. "You were just retracing my steps, reawakening the muscle memory. You've been my guide, Cole. You helped me remember who I am." The realization dawned in his eyes. It was a beautiful thing to watch. The last flicker of the hunter's pride dying, replaced by the ghastly understanding of the prey. He hadn't been hunting me. He hadn't been clever. He had been a key I had left for him to find, designed to unlock my own cage. "Die!" he screamed, the word tearing from his throat in a raw, desperate bellow. He raised the gun, his hands trembling so badly I was surprised he could aim. He pulled the trigger. Click! The sound was small, pathetic, dry and final. It was the emptiest sound in the world. He pulled the trigger again. Click! And again. Click! 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 A desperate, rhythmic punctuation to his own despair. An empty magazine. An empty hope. His face crumbled. The gun slipped from his nerveless fingers and clattered to the concrete floor. His shoulders slumped. The fight went out of him, replaced by a hollow void. I walked the rest of the way until I stood directly in front of him. I was close enough to smell his fear, a sour, sweaty odor. I looked down into his eyes, which were now just blank pools of terror. "You are the final piece," I said softly, my voice a low murmur. I savored the words, the truth of them, all of this. Finding me, cornering me, telling me our story. It was all necessary. Your revenge is my coronation. He just stared, his mouth hanging slightly open, a thin line of spittle on his lip. He didn't even seem to be breathing. I unfolded the map. The paper was soft and worn from being folded and unfolded so many times. The lines were drawn in thick black marker. Below the final location, factory, which I had circled, I had made a small list. My Anne personality, the weak, amnesiac shell, would never have looked closely enough to see it. It was a shopping list, a checklist for a ceremony. It read, Begear tracks, music box, photo, crowbar, car key. And then there was the last word on the list, the most important component. I raised my index finger and pointed to the word. Then I slowly moved my hand and tapped him, twice, on the center of his chest. His eyes followed my finger down to the map, read the last word, and then looked back up at my face. "Witness," I said, my smile widening. "You." A sliver of gray light cut through the barred window, painting a pale, dusty rectangle on the concrete floor. It was a weak, uncertain light, the kind that comes just before the sun. It pushed back the pulsing red of the emergency lamp, washing the small office in a neutral, dead color. The air was cool. I could smell the iron tang of blood and the faint, sour scent of Cole's sweat. I was seated on the edge of his desk, using a piece of oily rag I'd found on the floor to wipe my hands. I worked slowly, meticulously, cleaning each finger, scrubbing under each nail. The rag came away dark and wet. I hummed as I worked. A simple, bouncing melody. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. The tune felt clean in my throat, a contrast to the work my hands were doing. Cole made no sound. He was a heap in the corner, a discarded pile of clothes and slack limbs. One of his shoes had come off. His work shirt was torn at the shoulder. He was a completed task, the final item on a list. I felt no animosity toward him, no anger. I felt nothing at all, save for a quiet sense of order, of a room being put right. When my hands were clean, I folded the rag into a neat square and placed it on the desk. My gaze fell upon the map. It lay on the floor near Cole's nerveless hand, crumpled and stained. The map that had started everything. My map. I leaned down and picked it up, my movements smooth and unhurried. The paper was soft, almost like cloth, from 2 years of being folded and carried. I smoothed it out on the scarred surface of the desk. The lines I had drawn in thick black marker were still sharp. The apartment. The bridge. The factory. Each location was a key, a turn of a psychic lock. It was a work of art, in its own way. A meticulously planned therapy session. A faint smile touched my lips. The artist, admiring his own finished piece. The man who had drawn this map knew exactly what he was doing. And now, I was an artist again. I folded the map and slid it into the inner pocket of my leather jacket. I stood up. My body felt light. The dull ache that had lived behind my eyes for 2 years, the constant fog of confusion that was Adam, had evaporated. It was like waking from a long, low-grade fever. My mind was sharp, clear. The world had edges again. I stepped toward the door. I had to step over Cole's legs to get there. I did so without looking down, my boot landing softly on the concrete on the other side. He was just part of the room's geography now. A detail. I felt no pang of guilt, no tremor of remorse. The man who was capable of those feelings was gone. He had been a temporary construct, a shield built by a traumatized mind, a prison. And Cole, in his blind pursuit of vengeance, had handed me the key and shown me the door. I did not feel guilt. I felt a profound sense of return. I was home, in my own skin. The steel door was a wreck, its surface buckled and dented from my earlier work with the pipe. The filing cabinet Cole had pushed against it was a child's barricade. I put my shoulder to the metal and pushed. It didn't budge. The lock, though damaged, was still holding. I looked at the cabinet. It was heavy, but my arms felt strong. My purpose was clear. I wrapped my fingers around its top edge, found a purchase, and pulled. The cabinet scraped against the floor. The sound, a loud, declarative shriek of metal on concrete. It moved easily. I shoved it aside and tried the door again. The handle turned, but the bolt was stuck fast in the warped frame. It was no matter. The factory had other ways out. This was my playground now, not my prison. I turned back and looked up at the square hole in the ceiling from which I had made my entrance. I dragged the desk chair underneath it, climbed up, and pulled myself back into the cold, dark confines of the ventilation duct. I crawled back the way I came. The sound of my movement, a low, shuffling echo in the metal tube. This time the darkness was not a threat. It was a comfort. A quiet, private space. I emerged back onto the high concrete platform, dropping from the duct onto the dusty surface. The factory was transformed. The sun was rising now, and thick shafts of golden light streamed through the high, grimy windows, cutting through the gloom. Dust motes danced in the beams like tiny, glittering insects. The dormant machinery took on a new character in the light, no longer monstrous shadows but simply hulks of old, silent steel. It was beautiful. I used the service ladder to climb down to the main floor. The long steel pipe I had used to batter the office door was leaning against the wall where I'd left it. I walked past it. I didn't need it. I walked toward the front of the factory, my boots crunching softly on the debris-strewn floor. The large, corrugated roll-up door was shut fast, locked from the inside with a heavy sliding bolt. The mechanism was stiff with rust, but I put my weight into it. With a groan of protest, the bolt slid back. I grabbed the thick chain pulley and pulled. Link by heavy link, the door began to rise, admitting a brilliant flood of morning light. The air that rushed in was clean and cool, smelling of damp asphalt and distant trees. It was a stark contrast to the stale, metallic air of the factory. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs. It felt like the first real breath I'd taken in 2 years. I stepped out onto the cracked asphalt of the loading dock. The world was quiet. A bird sang somewhere nearby. Far in the distance I heard the faint, rising and falling wail of a siren. But it was heading away from me, a problem for someone else. It faded into nothing. The world was continuing on, utterly unaware that a ghost had just been given flesh again. This power, this anonymity, was intoxicating. The shell, called Atom, had been a cage of fear and uncertainty. Now, the bars were broken. I had not just escaped a building. I had escaped a lesser version of myself. The factory complex was bordered by a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. I followed it until I found a section where the bottom had been bent up, a shortcut used by teenagers or vagrants. I crouched and slid under it easily, my jacket catching briefly on a stray wire. I stood and brushed the dust from my trousers. I was on a small access road that ran behind the industrial park. A puddle from last night's rain had collected in a depression in the asphalt. It was still and dark, like a mirror of black glass. I stopped and looked down into it. I saw a face staring back up at me. It was my face. The same face I had seen in the mirror every day for 2 years. The face of a man lost, haunted. The face of a victim. The high cheekbones, the straight nose, the dark hair that needed a cut. But the eyes were wrong. Or rather, they were finally right. The fear was gone. The confusion was gone. The perpetual look of a man flinching from a blow he couldn't see was gone. Staring back at me from the dark water were my own eyes, and they were clear, intelligent, and calm. There was an stillness in them, a focus, an appraisal. I was not looking at a stranger. I was looking at me, the real me, the architect. I watched my reflection as I slowly, deliberately smiled. It was not the uncertain, hesitant smile of Adam. It was a confident, sharp-edged thing. The expression of a wolf that has just finished its meal and is already thinking about the next hunt. The monster hadn't just won. The monster had remembered it was never the monster at all. It was simply the predator. And the world was full of prey. It was a homecoming. I stood there for a long moment, just looking, memorizing the feeling of this reunion. Then I turned from the puddle and walked away. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the old, stained map. I looked at it one last time, a relic of a finished project. A masterpiece of psychological manipulation, even if the primary subject was myself. It had served its purpose. With a simple flick of my wrist, I let it go. It fluttered for a moment in the morning air before landing softly in a patch of weeds by the side of the road. It looked like any other piece of trash. My hand went into my other pocket. My fingers closed around a small, folded piece of paper and a sleek metal pen. I had purchased them 2 days ago, an act of pure, unthinking instinct by a part of me that was already waking up. An act of faith in my own design. I unfolded the paper. It was a fresh, clean sheet of high-quality sketch paper. Blank. A new canvas. I clicked the pen. The sound was crisp, final. I brought the tip of the pen down to the surface of the paper. It was time to draw a new map.